بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه ومن استنى بسنته إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. So welcome back to our second video from the series on Adalah Sahaba, or the integrity of the Sahaba. If you haven't seen the first video, it will be in the description below inshallah, and it goes over the definition of what a Sahabi is, and it contextualizes this video and later videos to come from this series inshallah. Now, Adalah is a very important concept to Islam. Many scholars have mentioned it and addressed it and even authored works on it. Al-Hafidh al-Iraqi in his Alfiya says, وَأَهْلُ هَذَا الشَّانِ قَسَّمُوا السُّنَنِ إِلَى صَحِيحٍ وَضَعِيفٍ وَحَسَنٍ فَالْأَوَّلُ الْمُتَّصِلُ الْإِسْنَادِ بِنَقْلِ عَدْلٍ ضَابِطِ الْفُؤَادِ. And so he mentions that one of the criteria of an authentic hadith is that a adl must be, that the transmitter must be a adl. And so one finds himself asking, what does it mean for a transmitter to be adl? What is Adalah and what are its implications? Abdullah, I'll give you the floor.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So the purpose behind Adalah, when the Muhaddithun required it as a condition in a transmitter, such that a transmitter's hadith, a transmitter's transmission are not even looked at until it is ascertained that the transmitter is a adl. The purpose behind it, their goal, was to prevent the possibility or limit the possibility that a transmitter would purposefully tamper, purposefully fabricate or forge a report. They did not want anyone to be lying about it. So they made this condition, one of the preconditions was Adalah, that a transmitter is adl. Now, based on this, that is the goal of Adalah. Based on this, you have various scholars that come, starting with Ash-Shafi'i, who died in the year 204, and ending until even now. Many people give their own definitions of Adalah. And in reality, each definition of Adalah will be problematic. Or not problematic, that may not be the best word, but it'll lack something. And the reason why is because Adalah is a spectrum, right? There's not an action someone does that makes them adl. This is contrary to dabt, because there is actions that one can partake in or someone can avoid.
What is dabt, if you don't mind?
So dabt is the concept of retention. So the two, I guess you could say, sister concepts are Adalah and dabt. A transmitter has to be a dabit. He has to, or first has to be adl, so to prevent lying. And he also has to be a dabit, which is that they accurately retain and can subsequently accurately transmit the report.
So good memory, essentially.
Good memory, yes, more or less.
Okay.
So the concept of dabt, a person can partake in an action or can avoid an action and thereby be considered a dabit. The same does not apply for Adalah since it's a spectrum. And as we mentioned, right, the goal is that a person is not a liar. So, you have the varying definitions of the scholars, and each of them try to define Adalah in a way which would lead to the transmitter not being a liar. Now, the best of these, definitions is by Shafi'i. He says in a Risala, when describing the conditions for authenticity, he says, الثقة في دينه الصادق في حديثه. Someone who is trustworthy in their religion and truthful in their speech. And he has a similar, more explanatory definition as well that can be found in Al-Kifaya and Manaqib al-Imam al-Shafi'i wa Adabih by Ibn Abi Hatim, where he talks about that there is no person who is infallible, right? No person who is infallible. There's not a person who has not mixed sin with observance. And for that reason, he says that the adil is somebody who is generally observant. And this position is also agreed upon by Ibn Hibban.
I'm glad that you brought up the concept of infallibility, because many Shias often bring up this point, and they essentially argue, well, just like we have the infallibility, the isma of the imma, you guys have the adalah of the Sahaba, which is analogous. So what would you respond to that?
So this clearly, a Shafi'i's statement that can be found, as I mentioned, Kifaya and Manaqib al-Imam al-Shafi'i, clearly debunks this, right? And the Shafi'i is an early critic. He died in 204. Now, this is not only the only reason we have. So, in theory, a Shafi'i statement debunks that. We also have practical examples which debunk this, where people are considered to be udul, they're considered to be trustworthy, they're considered to be reliable, their transmission is accepted, yet they fall into sin, sometimes major sin. And we have some examples we can go over. I'll mention one. So we have Asad ibn Wada'a, and Adhabi talks about him, or not Adhabi, sorry, Ibn Hajar talks about him in Lisan al-Mizan. So, Asad ibn Wada'a كان يسب عليا. He used to curse Ali radiallahu anhu. And there's 2 points I want to make here. Number one, cursing in itself is a sin. Cursing in itself is a sin. Add to that cursing Ali radiallahu anhu. This is a major sin, and it's not acceptable. Now, Al-Nasa'i, even though he knew this about this transmitter, Asad ibn Wada'a, he did not see this as a preventative reason, a reason which prevented him from declaring him to be reliable. He called him a thiqa, right? And he accepted his transmission. So the fact that he fell into this major sin did not prevent him from declaring him to be reliable. And there's a side point I want to go into, a little tangent, which is just shows the reliability, the impartiality, the unbiased nature of An-Nasa'i as well as the other early critics. Because An-Nasa'i is someone who has Shi'i leanings, right? And in fact, he's a martyr of the cause. When he entered into Damascus, he found that many people were disinterested in Ali. They did not like Ali radiallahu anhu. He was not, the most popular person in Damascus for obvious reasons. And he recognized that this is a problem. So he did 2 things. Number one, he authored a book called Khasa'is Ali, which is a book on the virtues of Ali radiallahu anhu. And then he transmitted it in Damascus and started talking about the virtues of Ali radiallahu anhu. And the people of Damascus were not very happy with him, and so they beat him almost to death in Damascus. And then he died from his wounds later on in either Ramla or Mecca. According to Al-Dhahabi, he died in Ramla.
So we see in this example that An-Nasa'i, who no one doubts has extreme love for Ali, like any Muslim, had no issue declaring this Nasibi transmitter to be reliable because he was trustworthy.
Mm-hmm.
So him falling into the major sin of cursing Ali ibn Abi Talib anhu, did not prevent An-Nasa'i, a lover of Ali, from declaring him to be reliable. Because he had Adalah, which is the bare minimum of piety to ensure that the transmitter does not lie when transmitting hadith or forge reports. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So, to add to that, I found a bunch of very interesting examples actually while doing my own research. And I came across a transmitter, a major transmitter in the 2nd century Hijrah, at the end of the 1st century. And his name is Al-Hasan bin Salih Al-Kufi. Now what's interesting about this transmitter is that he's a Zaydi Shi'i. Okay? He's not from Ahl Sunnah. He was an extreme Zaydi Shi'i. In fact, he was one of the major scholars of Zaydiyah, to the extent that a major branch of the Zaydi madhab, the Zaydi Shi'i madhab, is called As-Salihiyya. It's named after him. So this guy was not, a traditional Muslim according to Ahl Hadith. He clearly had a different theology. In fact, Abdullah bin Idris says, كَانَ لَا يَرَى جُمْعَةً وَلَا جِهَادًا. So as a result of his madhab, him being an extreme Zaydi, he used to not view the permissibility of praying Jum'ah behind the leaders at that time, so he used to not pray Jum'ah with the Muslims. And he used to not view jihad as obligatory under the banner of the Muslims at that time. And so this, according to the Muhaddithin, would constitute fisq, right? Someone ditching Salat al-Jum'ah, as we have in our hadith, somewhere more than 3 days, there's a seal placed upon the person's heart. Yet, they had no issue looking at this transmitter and declaring to be reliable. And so we see that Ya'qub bin Sufyan al-Fasawi, Abu Hatim al-Razi, Al-Imam al-Nasa'i himself, the one we mentioned earlier, Ad-Daraqutni, and Al-Hakim, and a bunch of other transmitters and critics deemed him reliable and trustworthy in his hadith. Why? They realized that even though this person would be classified as a deviant according to their own standards, he had enough trustworthiness and reliability such that he's a adil. his mistakes and his major sins. Leaving Jama'ah is a major sin. His major sin did not prevent them from acknowledging that this person was trustworthy, even though he was from a different school, with different opinions. And those different opinions are clearly contradictory to what we believe is the Quran and the Sunnah. And so they claim to be reliable. Another interesting example is Ismail ibn Sami' al-Nakhai. So this transmitter is from the early Khawarij. So earlier we presented an example from the Nawasib, which Imam Nasai declared to be a thiqah. You have an example from the Zaydi Shia, who was declared to be a thiqah. And I have an example from the Khawarij, Ismail ibn Sami' al-Nakhai. And what's interesting about this transmitter is, Abu Nu'aym said, قال لم يرى في جمعة ولا جماعة 40 سنة. He was not seen in a Jum'ah prayer or in a Jama'ah, not even praying with the Muslims in their mosques. For 40 years he used to ditch them. And so this, according to us, would be fisq. Right? According to the technical standards of Ahl Sunnah, this would be a clear act of fisq and a major sin. Yet we find that the Muhaddithin had no issue declaring him to be reliable. And so we have Ibn Ma'in, Yahya ibn Ma'in, Al-Ijli, Ibn Sa'd, Muhammad bin Abdullah bin Numayr, and a bunch of other Muhaddithin declaring him to be a thiqah or a saduq. And so we see in these examples a recurring phenomenon, which is that they had no issue declaring transmitters who committed major sins in their lives to be reliable. And this actually goes back to one issue, which is a lot of these transmitters fell into these major sins as a result of a misunderstanding or a misinterpretation of religious texts. So when a transmitter falls into such an error, it's much different than when someone purposely decides to sin or go against the Quran and the Sunnah. Because often these transmitters, like the Zaydiyah and the Shia and the Nawasib, they often do fall into their bid'ahs out of religious fervor. They think it's getting them closer to Allah, and they have good intentions, and we don't doubt that they have good intentions. And our scholars didn't doubt that they had good intentions. Obviously, we believe it's a major sin. These deviancies are all major sins. However, they had good intentions, and they fell into these sins. And so we had no issue looking at them and realizing that they were trustworthy people, and they were honest for their causes as well. And so we declared them to be thiqat. And so it's different than someone who is a drunkard and is falling into zina and stealing and killing all the time, and that as a whole becomes a certain lifestyle that person lives. It's different than a person who is a mubtadi'. And so we look at that, our scholars had no issue declaring major extreme rawafid and Shia to be reliable. We have Ibn Khuzaymah in his Sahih, transmitting to the transmitter Abbad ibn Yaqub, he says, حدثنا المتهم في دينه الثقة في حديثه عباد ibn Yaqub. So Abbad ibn Yaqub is one of the major rawafid. And an interesting side note, Al-Bukhari transmits through him certain hadith in his Sahih. So Ibn Khuzaymah said, we were told by the one who is suspect in his faith. So he's so extreme in his rafd and his Shi'ism that Ibn Khuzaymah said he was suspect in his faith. We were told by the one who was suspect in his faith, yet trustworthy in his hadith. And so that didn't prevent Ibn Khuzaymah from declaring to be a thiqah. And we have numerous examples where this occurs. And so when someone falls into a sin as a result of ta'wil, or a misunderstanding of text, we have no issue being impartial and seeing that this person is trustworthy, even though he falls into a major sin, which is a bid'ah, and we declare them to be thiqat. And so, in conclusion, how would you summarize this whole discussion on Adalah?
The main takeaway is what Adalah actually is. The reality of Adalah is, we say حقيقته أن يكون لدى الراوي من الدين ما يمنعه من تعمد الكذب. That Adalah is that a transmitter has of personal piety and self-respect that which would prevent them from lying. So if their religion, their amount of religiosity or amount of self-respect they have prevents them from lying, their hadith would be accepted. And if they did not, the hadith would not be accepted. And sins, falling into sin, does not, justify taking away the ism of Adalah, the name of Adalah from a transmitter. And Adalah is not infallibility. And we prove that by, number one, in theory from a Shafi'i saying, that can be found in Kifaya and Manaqib al-Shafi'i wa Adabi by Ibn Abi Hatim, as well as the many practical examples that we mentioned.
So if someone were to present to you a person and then show that this person committed a major sin in his life, would that be enough to retract the description of Adalah from this person?
No, it would not be. And suffice it to say that the most major sin, the worst sin a person can commit, is shirk and kufr. Yet, if a person became a Muslim after being a non-Muslim, their transmission would be accepted. Because Tawbah removes it. Their becoming to Islam removes it. So how about any sin that is less than shirk? Obviously, a proper Tawbah will remove it.
Interesting. So I think that sums it up for today. We went over the main points regarding Adalah and its definition, its implications, and arguments for Adalah, and we brought up some relative examples that display this concept and explain it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask us in the comment section below. You can direct to us your questions on Twitter, the Roman Arab. You have Abdullah Mu'taz on Twitter, and we'll be glad to answer any of your questions. And I think that sums it up for today. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.